Welcome to Ambition's Apex, your guide to mastering the art of physique transformation and achieving peak performance across all arenas of life. Our mission is not just to sculpt bodies, but to change lives, empowering you towards excellence. Dive in with us as we explore insights and strategies designed to elevate you towards your journey of self-improvement. Enjoy the ascent. Welcome back to another episode of Ambition's Apex. My name is Sean Irwin. I am the host here. We have a little bit of like an unofficial series going on called Saga Talk, and I own a coaching business called Saga Coaching. And today with me, I have a fellow coach on the team, Danielle. She is also an IFBB pro. So Danielle, say hello to everybody.
Hey, everyone.
All right. So today we're going to be doing a Saga Talk about Danielle's journey from like the beginnings to turning pro and some of the things that we have going on right now for her, and some of the things that we've learned along the way. And also we want to talk a lot about peak week and some of the things to expect from that. So Danielle, I want to start with kind of understanding and talking about your like the very beginning of when you wanted to pursue bodybuilding and where you were at mentally in terms of what you knew about training and nutrition, supplementation, etc. Because some people get into bodybuilding and they already have a great, like a huge foundation. They already know a ton about nutrition. They've been training for like a decade, maybe, whatever it is. And then they start bodybuilding and they're already kind of ahead of the curve, if you will. But where were you at mentally in terms of your knowledge of nutrition, training, supplementation, as well as the sport of bodybuilding?
Yeah. So I'd say bodybuilding kind of came a little bit later. Graduated with a BS degree in kinesiology. And probably like my senior year of college, that's when I started like getting a little bit more like routine in the gym. I started to understand like the benefits of, lifting, resistance training, and how that I was a dancer, or I still am, just not as much, and how that benefited me in that art form and a little bit more of an athlete in that aspect, but I wasn't in any way, shape, or form. I didn't even know what bodybuilding was at that time. So after I graduated, I was doing a couple different jobs. I was doing some like teaching dance, but then I also, again, I started to get this like itch for being more in the gym. So I started working at a gym. I was doing like group fitness and then slowly got into like personal training. And that's where the kind of itch, I started getting people in my ear about, have you ever thought about doing bodybuilding, came about. And so it wasn't right away. It was definitely like a year or so. And then I was like, maybe I'll give this a shot. But I absolutely had no clue what bodybuilding was, no clue what like all it encompassed. I knew someone that had done bodybuilding. They told me who their coach was, and I just like went with it. So hindsight, definitely would take a different approach now. But with that said, I feel like this was in 2018. There's so much more like information out there now. There's so much more like social media knowledge about, just even like what you need to look for in a coach. But I'd say that was my like starting point of, I just kind of like dove into it. And then after my first show, that's when I started learning all that's encompassing in bodybuilding.
Yeah, I love that. So with the kinesiology degree, I'm curious how much you think kind of translated into your understanding of bodybuilding. Like, was there a gap to bridge between like your knowledge of kinesiology and then what is applied within bodybuilding?
Yeah. And, you hear people say like the like science-based lifters versus, like practical application. And I think there's something to go with both of them. Like a textbook is only going to get you so far. So yes, I knew like basic terminology. I knew basic nutrition. I knew biomechanics on a basic level. But I think on the other side of things, just putting it into practical application with like your body or other people's bodies is something else. It's a lived experience you have to go through.
Absolutely. That's something I've heard before too with like education in terms of vocabulary, because a lot of people may think that we're using like certain words to like sound smart and stuff, but the more you understand like certain vocabulary when it comes to human physiology, that kind of stuff, the more accurately we can describe certain things and be accurate with our words and how we educate as well. So that's probably pretty valuable. I know that I took a lot of that from my education as well, just being able to accurately describe things, right? So that can be pretty important. Now, moving towards, jumping into competing, what were some of the initial things like learning curves that you had? What were some of the things that you had to overcome? And what were some of the first like eye-opening experiences that you had when you jumped into bodybuilding?
So with my first prep, I would say we just dove straight into a prep, and that was the adjustment to like being on a strict nutrition plan. Like it's again, now it's like, well, duh, right? But when that's like the first time doing it, I had no understanding of what all was going to be going on with my body, with my like physiology and like the want to eat something else. And I lived in a small town too. There was no other people trying to do bodybuilding around me, so I didn't really have anyone to like talk to or get like an idea of like it is normal. You just kind of have to suffer through it sometimes. So that was definitely a big adjustment for my first prep of understanding like no, you do have to like eat what's on plan. If you go off plan, you do need to communicate that with your coach. Like there are going to be tough times. So that was one big thing for my first prep. But then after that, understanding like what is expected and what's supposed to happen. I think once you do it once, it's you understand what's supposed to happen going forward.
Now, leading up to the start of your prep, were your eating habits a little bit more flexible? Like, did you have more free meals? Did you kind of not think that it had to be as rigid leading up to that?
Yeah. I had not been I've always been like a healthier eater, but to be on a specific like this amount of, weighed chicken, this amount of like vegetables and nothing more, I had never done something like that. So
Yeah, and you and I are both very type A, and a lot of people that do well with bodybuilding are very type A individuals as well. So, when you kind of transitioned into that, did you pick it up pretty quickly? Were you able to get up to speed pretty quick? And did you start to enjoy it more?
yeah, I think, like I said, that was my first prep, and that was just like getting adjusted to everything. But I do like the structure. I very much like the structure of things, and that's where I kind of cling to it. And you hear people say, if you get the itch to do a bodybuilding competition, go and do it, and then you'll quickly realize if you want to do it again, like that you're kind of hooked on this process. If not, you know that like, hey, maybe just a healthy lifestyle is the route for you. So I know after stepping off stage the first time, I got that like I want to continue doing this. And that's not to say that there hasn't been many ups and downs and struggles. It hasn't been just like all fantastic since then. There's been a lot of learning lessons, but I definitely didn't want to stop.
Keyword there is process, right? And we have to love the process. A lot of people get into bodybuilding because they want the end outcome. It's no different than like in business. Like if you just want the money, you're probably not going to get there necessarily. There's got to be some passion. There's got to be some love for the process. There's got to be like some grit in there. So, it's not as simple as like, you look at these physiques online on Instagram or wherever, and you're like, I want that, or I want the trophy, or I want the glam of being on stage. And you have to love the process. All the external stuff is really, really poor in terms of motivational values. Type A individuals, like we may gravitate towards bodybuilding maybe a little bit more, I would argue, probably. I'm sure that there's plenty of type B people that are bodybuilders, but I'm very, very routine oriented. And when I started bodybuilding, I went through like a pretty long, like what you would consider an off season. I guess you could call it like a long extended growing phase before I even went into a contest prep. Many will kind of already be in a decent position and then just kind of go into a contest prep, similar to like what you did, right? And then, compete and then start growing after that. But when I initially wanted to bodybuild, I was like, I'm going to go through the process of like 2 years leading up to my actual competition. And that's exactly what I did. And I immediately like picked up like the routine. Everything was just like, I loved it already. Like, so I was like really far out from my first show. I was already eating pretty rigid. Like, I'd have some flexibility there here and there, but I was already training extremely hard, really putting myself through extreme sessions, very high intensity stuff leading up to that initial show, like a whole like year and a half to 2 year process leading up to that. And I loved every single moment of it, like the whole process leading up to it. And honestly, like the show date itself mattered way less to me. The process leading up to that was what I enjoyed the most. I just wanted to get back to work after the show. And, it was cool. And then the second show that I did, I started to attach myself to the identity of like wanting to win the show more. And I wanted an overall because I hadn't gotten an overall at my first show. So I was completely and utterly just dedicated towards winning. I like all I thought about was like, I want to win the show. I want to get the overall. And then I started to get a little bit cocky about it too. I was like, I am going to get the overall. Like, I was like, I'm going to go to nationals afterwards. I'm going to get my pro card, etc. Right. So I started to get a little bit arrogant about it. I was super young at the time and I got second place at that show. And I had like, people will say like a lineup for me, like at the time, that show, the lineup in my open class was like pretty solid. And like there was a few guys in that class that ended up turning pro like the next year. And then two of them actually ended up on the Olympia stage as well, or it might have just been one. I don't know. But it was like a difficult class for just a local level show, at least for me at the time in relation to where my physique was, right? And I got a big slice of humble pie really quick. And I like had attached myself to that identity of like wanting to win the show, wanting to get the overall. I was convinced that I was going to secure it pretty easily too. So, afterwards I was lost. But I thought back, like after some time, meditation on it, and the process was what I had loved. Like the thinking about winning and winning when I did win didn't really matter nearly as much. It wasn't nearly as valuable. And I wasn't able to translate all the things that I learned within that process into more important areas of life as well. So, that's where I started to reattach myself to the journey and the process and valuing that in much higher regard. And I was much happier, much more fulfilled, and I got better results that way too. So, this is just any competitors out there that are listening, enjoy the process, focus on the process. Don't focus on the glitz and the glam of stage because it's fleeting. And the process and the journey that you go through, the lessons that you learn along the way as well are extremely valuable. And again, you can translate them into all other areas of life. It builds wisdom, it builds just general knowledge, perspective of the world, worldview, all that kind of stuff, the way that you conduct yourself as a professional, everything. So, for you within the process, what are some things that you love the most? Like for me, like I said, I like the routine. I like doing kind of the same thing every single day. The monotony of it is enjoyable for me. I like predictability. What are some things for you that you enjoy the most about the process?
Yeah. Well, and even just to touch on kind of, I think I had a little bit of a different approach with competing because I went into that first show with like zero expectations, zero knowledge of anything. So it was kind of just like deer in headlights, like to have fun. And like, let's just see what happens. And not to say like I've definitely gotten more competitive since then in my mindset, but I feel like I've almost gone into each show with the mindset of like, I'm just gonna like show up and show what I have. Like, yes, of course, we all want to win. That's what we're there to do. But I feel like people that go in with the mindset of like, I'm going to take the overall and I'm here to like dominate, like maybe that works for some people, but I feel like there's one show I kind of went into it with that mindset of like, I'm here to take it all. And then when you don't, like your mindset crashes. And so even like when like we did national shows, I feel like I had a better experience because I didn't go in like expecting to get a pro card. So then when we secured the pro card, it was like that much more fulfilling. And again, in that mindset of like, it's not about the show, it's about the day-to-day things. That's what I truly enjoy. So when the showtime comes, that's great. Like here's me showing off my work, but what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, like the food I eat, the way I train, like that's what I enjoy doing. I'm someone that like very much I like that I have a meal plan. I don't have to think about it. It's like prepped for the week. I don't like to make decisions. I'm more so indecisive person, so that's a nice thing. I like that I don't have to necessarily go in the gym and like, what kind of workout am I going to do today? I know what my goal is. I know what I'm going in there to do. I know what I'm like working on. So those two things, training, nutrition, I think, finding how disciplined you can be as a person, not just like as a bodybuilder, but the discipline you can have in your life of being able to juggle everything, being able to juggle um, your family on top of like being a disciplined person with your nutrition, your work life, your social life. So being able to like have that kind of discipline, I think is a really fulfilling experience too.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you mentioned being prepared and like the decision stuff. And that's valuable for anybody because especially like within business, there was like Steve Jobs, for example, he always wore like the same shirt every single day. There's a lot of CEOs that do something similar where it's just like they have like three shirts and they just wear the same shirts, the same exact shirts over and over and over again because it eliminates like having to make decisions essentially. And it's similar with like your routine with your meal plan or whatever it may be as well. The reason that they do that is because they have to make decisions about so many other things within their life, right? So if you have a lot going on, say you're, a parent and you have children and you have a full-time job and you're juggling a lot and you have a lot going on, but you're also wanting to prioritize your fitness goals, for example, having just a set like repeatable meal plan, it can be extremely valuable in that because you just don't have to make decisions about it. And you may find that having to make decisions like at the end of the day, like, oh, do we have food for this evening, like to make sure that we have dinner, you're at least yourself already like pre-planned, like you already know what you're going to do. You can worry about figuring things out for everybody else around you and focus on that energy like being expended towards decisions on more valuable things rather than yourself. So, if you're somebody that's relatively self-sacrificing too in terms of focusing on everybody else all the time. Like I said, you could be focusing on your job, providing for others, etc., your children. Then you have to be able to fill your own cup before you can pour into others, right? And you have to take care of yourself first. At least like make sure that you're taking care of yourself because you're going to be able to perform and serve others in a better fashion as well. But being able to, have things where you don't have to make decisions about your own stuff is really valuable. And I find that that's helpful for me as a coach. Just having my routine just set in stone, like I don't have to make any decisions about it. So I can focus on making decisions for my athletes and everybody else around me. It's really helpful. So, but let's backtrack a little bit and get back to where we were at journey wise for you. So you did your first show and then we had a couple shows after that, right? Or we had one or two. And then at what point did we start working together?
Yeah, I did it my first show. And then I did the typical switched over to a different coach because I just wanted to keep chasing that high, I think. We did it. I did a show with that coach about a year later. And then I felt my health had taken a pretty like big turn. And that was also when 2020 ish time when the world shut down. And I switched career paths. I got into teaching. So there was like a lot of shifts in my life. And I just kind of like put a pause on bodybuilding so I could focus on my health, my career, my stuff like that. I took about 2 years off. Still, I was still going to the gym, being active, and then I moved back to Houston, and that is when I was like, I need to, get back into what I love and start doing some more things for myself. And I reached out to you, and that's when we got started about fall of 2022.
And then we did Muscle Beach, correct? And we won the overall there. And then we went on to do nationals. Those are the only shows we did leading up to nationals, right?
We did like a little mini prep. I thought it was a good little way for us to like see how we would prep together.
Hmm.
And then, yes, from there we went into Muscle Beach.
Yeah, I remember that. You did like a little fashion show at the Olympia, right? Yeah, that was fun. Yeah, so and then Muscle Beach, we got the overall. You killed it, and it was like just undeniable. And then we went to nationals, and we got sixth, right? Or
Yes,
yes, that's right. And we learned pretty quickly that you needed some more size. You were very conditioned, like you were peeled. I would argue some of the best conditioning in the entire division at that year at nationals. But we needed more size, and you are taller as well. So remind me how tall you are.
I'm about between like 5'10", 5'11".
Gotcha. Yeah. So, usually the taller you are, depending on genetics and stuff as well, it can be a little bit more of an uphill battle in terms of filling out the frame. So after nationals, we knew that we could get the conditioning that we needed for a pro card, right? For pro status in general. And then we went on to focus on putting on size, which we did. And then we did the Lee Labrada Classic, and that was last year, 2025. And then we went on to do North Americans, and that's where you secured your pro card, right? So through that process, let's talk about kind of the arc of like learned experience. So like from the past experiences you had leading up to working with me and then into Muscle Beach, what were some things that you had learned like throughout that process leading up to that? And then where were you at like maturity wise within the sport? leading up to Muscle Beach Classic?
Well, I think it's safe to say something learned was like obviously it takes time to put muscle on anyone, but yes, specifically a taller frame. But that's not also to say that it's not doable. When I my first show for novice and for open, there was 9 competitors in my class, in my height class, and I got open. So still did pretty well for not having like a ton of muscle on me, but also shows that there's a lot of other like tall girls out there. And then, especially at nationals, that's where you really see like there's a lot of tall girls and they have the muscle on them. But it does take time, and taking a true full like off season, not just like a 4 month, 5 month like span, but like a true off season to accomplish that goal. And not just like, I'm going to take an off season, but your off season is just like working out here and there and like eating whatever you want, like you're still on, you're still taking it seriously because you have a goal to accomplish. So I think that's something that maybe in the past before us working together, I had one like off season and I didn't really understand it. And I think I just got like, packed on some unnecessary weight.
Mhm.
And so when we worked together, I had a better understanding of that.
That's good. And then what were some things that you had? Did you just have like a much better perspective in terms of knowing just maturity as an athlete, knowing what was going to happen, and having more confidence going through that? And then did you feel less nervous because of that as well? Like, especially during like the last few moments of the prep?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, for the most part, things should be pretty like routine, like not a lot should be changing like your meal, like you're not introducing a bunch of new like food or anything like that. You kind of understand the routine the more you do it. Now that's not to say there can be like random factors that get thrown in. I know we've had like things here and there, but we've been able to like adjust. So I'd say, yeah, I think the more you do it, the more routine. Now, what has also been, I think, a good thing to highlight is the fact that when we started working together, one thing I noticed that hadn't been done in the past, and a coach that is not paying attention to health markers like your sleep, your like cycle, not getting lab work. Now, to me, now like that's a red flag. And that's not stuff that was ever getting like paid attention to in the past. And so I think for us, I think that's something that has helped us, well, me and you specifically, I'm talking about working together for like the preps that we've done, being able to dial things in more and be more predictable because we have focused on those things. Whereas before, I wasn't tracking sleep, I wasn't tracking caffeine, I wasn't tracking like if I had lost my cycle. So it was like throwing caution to the wind at that point.
Yeah, for sure. And I've talked about this a little bit on social media and stuff as well on Instagram, but just talking about how much information we have available now. When I got my start as a coach, I was digging as much. I was obsessed with learning, right? A lot of coaches are getting into the game now and just wanting the money, they're wanting a piece of the pie, right? But when I started, I just wanted to learn. I wanted to be better at what I did, right? So I was doing everything I could and paying as many mentors as possible and going to practicals and getting as many certifications as possible, all that kind of stuff, and just building up resources in terms of where could I be sending my athletes for labs, like how can we, just streamline things the entire process. So if there's any like newer coaches listening to this, please focus on those things because right now we have so much information available to us. Like you can build a really solid coaching business, but you need to build your skill set first and your knowledge and what you understand and strive towards that because the money will come if you do those things. When I was starting, it was much more difficult. Like I remember taking courses on like resistance training, for example, and I would travel to these like big, events where I would learn a bunch from these like experts and stuff. And you can still do those things and there's still huge value in like analog kind of experiences. But right now you can just go online and learn so much. And there's so much information and great information being spread on social media. Obviously, there's some terrible information being spread as well. But just find somebody or an outlet that is great when it comes to like kind of filtering out the bullshit for you in terms of knowledge and delivery on that. There's some great mentors out there within our space that do just that. So focus on the education piece first, because what Danielle's discussing right now is, shifting over to working with me when I had been focused on those things and how much of a a night and day kind of experience that was for her in terms of her coaching experience. So you want people to be talking about you as a coach, like Danielle just spoke about me, right? Because like I said, I was focused on the right things. I was focused on building my skill set, learning more, and being able to deliver coaching services in a better manner. Oh, but we want people talking about us the way that Danielle is, because then you don't have to go on Instagram and deceive people as much. Do whatever you need to do in terms of marketing to like try to get people to buy your coaching. You can just be good at what you do and people will want to buy from you, right? So those are things to focus on. Beginning to work with me, we were pulling labs, we were making sure that your health was aligned, we were being responsible about things, understanding what was going on internally. When you do those things, we're able to tailor the programming towards you a lot better. Let's talk on this a little bit because this is important for people to understand. The process from where we started together and getting to your pro card may have taken a little bit longer than it may have needed to if you would have done things in a less responsible manner, right? And there's a balance to ride there because bodybuilding has inherent risks, even for natural athletes. And I would argue that competing as a natural athlete is arguably more deleterious to your health than if you were to very responsibly and conservatively enhance, right? Or replace hormones, depending on the individual and what's going on internally with them throughout the process, right? But going through a contest prep has, and just off season, just bodybuilding in general has inherent risks, right? And we want to ride that line because we have to take certain risks to get to a certain reward, depending on how high that reward is, right? So if you want to get to the Olympia level, there's going to be risks involved, even as a natural athlete. If you're enhanced, it doesn't matter, and this can be dependent on, genetic predispositions, how well you can tolerate certain things, bio-individuality in general. But the fundamental truth of the fact that there are inherent risks involved does not dissipate whatsoever. And so when we look at like timeline, we can do things in a more responsible manner while still pushing the envelope to some extent, riding a balance there, getting somebody to where they want to be. Now, there may be some level of deleterious effects leading up to that position, but we can minimize those. And we call it harm reduction throughout the process, where we're reducing harm, eliminating unnecessary risk where there is. So like if we're talking about like things like compounding risk factors, right? Let's look at the entire picture. Where can we eliminate certain things? Where can we focus on other pathways that make more sense, that have lower risk profiles to get us to the same outcome, right? And sometimes that means that it takes a little bit longer to get there. That isn't necessarily a bad thing. You should be doing this for the right reasons, and you should want to be doing it for in some responsible kind of manner. So you're not just tossing your long-term health into the wind. Now, to each their own. If somebody's like, screw it, I don't care, I want to get from A to B as quickly as possible, and I don't care what it costs, so be it. But I would argue that most people want to have some semblance of like normalcy, or be able to have the ability to get back to just being a completely normal human after bodybuilding, right? There's life after bodybuilding. It's there, it's going to happen. So let's like set ourselves up for success for that too. At least write a balance here where we can focus on these things and have it all in mind when we're programming things. So, like I said, it's a balance. And this is why you hire a coach. So, like for me, for example, one of the primary things that I'm always focused on when I'm working with my athletes is juggling all these things in my mind in terms of what I'm looking at with the athletes. So if we're looking at what their goals are, right? What is like where are they trying to get to, like how high is that goal, and then what are they willing to do risk wise to get there, and then having a discussion around that too, and educating around that as well, so that we can like have a realistic discussion in terms of where we're trying to head and what it's going to take to get there, as well as the potential duration, and then how that can look and change depending on the risks involved. And then looking at like what their other priorities are, like, life outside of bodybuilding, all that kind of stuff. So, and then just taking everything all into consideration when we are building a program, mapping things out, and then, looking at compounding risk factors. Where can we eliminate risk? Where can we input other levers that make more sense that can drive us towards that? And then just orchestrating all of that. So, those are all things that a good coach is going to do in terms of, caring. And that's not to say that a coach like me doesn't push to extremes either, because, we sometimes we need to risk it for the biscuit. Like I said, bodybuilding has inherent risks, but we're being mindful of things at least. And then focusing on afterwards to resolving any issues that do arise, because we talk about kind of acute things, and then like in contest prep, a lot of things are going to start to skew regardless of enhanced status, natural status. It doesn't matter. Things are going to shift most likely. unless you're just a complete genetic outlier, there's probably somebody out there that may be able to get through a full contest prep without any impact on their health. But that aside, some things are going to skew, and being able to focus on getting those back into good positions afterwards so we don't extend the duration in which those things are skewed internally is what's going to help your like general longevity, your health down the road, your ability to enjoy life, have kids, all that kind of stuff, right? So Danielle, what like leading up to where we are now, so like we got your pro card, and do you feel like from our first show together to you getting a pro card that we did things in a pretty responsible manner? And do you think that everything I just discussed was executed at a pretty high level? Went from our first show together to getting a pro card and we did things in a pretty responsible manner. I think that we kept your health in a very high regard. I don't think that we could have done much better outside of very tiny details that are negligible in the grand scheme of things. So can you say the same? And what are some things that you think we focused on that helped us achieve that?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's not like it's been, 10 years. It was accomplished in, um, I think like less than 3 years, somewhere around there. But regardless, I think we definitely approached it in a safe, effective manner. I think kind of what I touched on earlier is one big thing was like how many biofeedback markers that are recorded on a weekly, daily basis, being able to like really focus on like my sleep, really being able to focus on my stress, being able to supplement where needed, like having all of those factors in place, I think is really important. And I like the saying of, like the quicker the rise to the top, the faster the fall. I feel like I don't hear too many people like saying they want to like get their pro card like within a year, but I'm sure there's still some people out there that have that kind of like goal and mindset. The point to that is like why do you need to get it? Because then you're going to be a pro, and then what, are you not going to win like any more shows for a while? You're kind of like back at the bottom of the totem pole. And so that goes back to even just like the beginning of our conversation of enjoying the process, because it is a long game that you have to play. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And I think the way we approached it was what you said, like the best way to do it with minimal, you know, eff- minimal side effects.
And we got you to a pro card too. So you are now an IFBB Pro. So I want to shift gears just a little bit. We wanted to talk about peak week a bit today. So peak week is fun and it can vary from person to person. At least it should vary from person to person, unless somebody's just sending out the same program to every athlete for their peaking. It should be very tailored to the individual. It can look very different for many different people. And, in a perfect world, we're heading into peak week extremely lean and pretty much ready to step on stage. And it's just the finishing touches. When it comes to peaking, obviously, the entire peak week, our primary objective is cosmetic. So it's to look as, depending on the division, I mean, it could, especially bikini. I'm primarily talking about bikini in terms of being an outlier here, but pretty much any division, we're going to want to look as hard, full, dry, and as peeled as possible, right? And present our physique in a fantastic way in terms of just how you look, the energy you're bringing to stage as well. Cause I don't think that enough people talk about that, like the aura that you're bringing onto stage. And we don't want that to be like super fatigued. And then also obviously posing too, right? If you can't present the physique in a specific way, you can really knock yourself down the totem pole in terms of positioning when it comes to the competition. Everything that we're doing leading up to that is focused on cosmetic purposes. So trying to look our very best on stage. And the process through that is going to entail a lot of pulling off fatigue. You should be in shape by the time we're heading into our peak week. So eliminating fatigue, like unnecessary fatigue, a lot of it's going to be like pulling things like cardio, at least dramatic cardio reduction, probably leaning more towards like steps, which can set more of a parasympathetic tone. You're going to be in a little bit more relaxed of a state. We're going to be focused a lot on just sleep. There's going to be deloading involved most likely in terms of resistance training. So those are things that should be happening in terms of fatigue reduction. Like I said, not everybody's the same. Like Danielle, we went through a peak week one time where we had to kind of push cardio a little bit towards the last second for specific reasons that were specific to Danielle in that time. But most of the time when I'm peaking athlete, we're pulling that kind of stuff ideally completely out. Like cardio should be pretty much completely out if possible, and just give them a whole week off of that to reduce as much fatigue as possible. reduce as much inflammation in the legs as possible, because that's a big piece of it too. In a bodybuilding athlete, a lot of the inflammation is going to sit in the legs. So we want to definitely reduce that as much as possible, bring out as much detail as possible. Again, cosmetic stuff. And then again, like the aura that you're bringing to stage two should be well rested. I don't hear a lot of people talk about like the fullness that you can get from being well rested too. Like sometimes that can be because of like shifts in fasting blood glucose, that kind of stuff. A lot of other hormonal processes that happen from being relatively like sleep deprived, or even just being a little bit less rested or more fatigued. A well rested physique is going to be able to bring out as much fullness as it's capable of bringing out. Just like I said, inflammation reduction, modulating electrolytes as well. So we're looking at sodium, potassium, water shifts throughout that period of time as well, carbohydrates and how they are played in tandem with the electrolytes as well, shifting that, and then keeping the waist as tight as possible as well. So a lot of things to take into consideration here when it comes to peaking in terms of coach's perspective. But Danielle, I want to get athlete's perspective in terms of what we're looking at and focused on as an athlete within contest prep, where our mind's at, preparation, building lists, making sure that you have the things you need, travel, et cetera, et cetera. So what are some primary things that you focus on, and kind of from like start to finish, from the heading into your peak week, and then what you start to like ramp things up with in terms of preparation leading up to the show?
I'd say as much as we want our peak week to be like perfectly planned, everything goes accordingly, it's not going to. I don't think I've ever had a peak week that was like exactly perfect. I've like had to move during a peak week. I've had a breakup during a peak week. I've had um a water leak from my ceiling during a peak week. Like there's just so many things that will go on top of just like life things, work that you're still, if you're fortunate to take off work, awesome. But there's going to be a lot of stressors, and it's what you can do to mitigate like the stress. I think is the big thing, is to keep your stress low, being able to sleep, get good quality sleep. But that's where also like the planning in advance, I know you mentioned like the list, and I'm a big type A list person, so what you can have done in advance is going to be really helpful. So if you've already gotten your like NPC card, your registration done, you should already have your suit and your heels, um, your hair, your makeup booked. If you're getting that done, your tanning booked, your registration for the show done, like all of that should be done in advance and not waiting till peak week to get that done, because at that point, like I'm typically brain dead, you know, and that's the last thing I want to be doing, is trying to like calculate and like analyze what needs to get done. Just you do have more frequent check-ins with your coach typically on peak week. And they'll start to increase in frequency. So just making sure that you're like on time with that, making sure that you are stocked up with the food items that you need, just making sure, yeah, supplements, you have everything. So you're not like last minute trying to scramble for something, which will add to the stressors that are inevitably going to come, so trying to make sure that like you have the P's and Q's, like all of that, like checked off.
Yeah, absolutely. And leading up to it, there can be a lot of nerves and stuff too, and like anxiety and anticipation, and can make it really difficult to like, keep yourself well rested. So it's a challenge because it's very much like a collision of like a high stress situation with like somebody like your coach ideally telling you to keep stress as low as possible. So it's like very conflicting position to be in, right? But what are some things that helped you relax? Obviously, like doing things like lists and stuff, I'm sure was helpful in terms of decluttering your mind and then just being prepared. I think that probably type B people that may be waiting last second to do certain things or may not have things as organized may have a little bit more stressful of a time leading up to that. But outside of just general preparation stuff, what are some things that you do to help you keep your nerves calm? Because, like you said, you've gone through some pretty stressful situations. I know even North Americans, like you flew into the wrong city, right? Yeah, so that's a funny story. Maybe we'll touch on that a little bit more. But what are some general things that you do to help keep the nerves at bay?
Yeah, I would say, I think I know you touched on just like if cardio is reduced, being able to like go for a walk. So instead of maybe walking on the treadmill, walking outside, if you're fortunate again enough to like take off work, and that comes with some pre planning, but if you're able to account for that and take time off work, that's automatically going to give you some extra time to rest and just getting done what you need to in advance so that you don't want to do anything if you can knock those things out earlier.
Yeah, for sure. That stuff can be really helpful. I love that you touched on taking work off because that always helps me too. Fortunately, I was a personal trainer when I was bodybuilding, but I was working pretty like heavy hours and I would work harder leading up to my peak week so that I could take peak week off entirely. I would just make sure that my clients all knew like ahead of time, like, hey, I'm taking a whole week off. And that was always really helpful for me. So if you do have like the flexibility and privilege to be able to do that, some people obviously do not, but if you do, it's a great strategy to keep stress lower because it almost like starts to feel like a little bit of a vacation, right? I've worked really hard to leading up to this. It feels like a vacation because you're taking some time off of work, kind of chilling inside, maybe keeping it dark and quiet and cold, going outside, like you said, touching grass, that kind of stuff can be really helpful in terms of just making sure that you're in a good headspace and being able to complete a prep is like a huge, like definitely pat on the back, even like regardless of the outcome, right? Like you were able to get through that entire thing and get through the struggles and all the trials and tribulations. That's what Saga means, the journey, like the trials and tribulations, the ups and the downs, the difficulties, the challenges to like reach kind of a pinnacle or just the whole story of it. That's essentially what the word saga means. So that's why I named my coaching business just that, because it really encompasses everything that you have to go through leading up to that kind of final time. So, when you hit that peak week, definitely give yourself a pat on the back, reflect back, celebrate yourself a little bit and what you've learned, reflect on what you've learned and let go of the outcome because whatever happens, happens. Obviously, there's a lot that is in your control, right? Like in terms of executing the final moments, posing on stage, like that kind of stuff. But a lot of that stuff, like most of the control you had over it was during the prep anyway. So like if you're for example, like if you're too focused on like final, like last minute posing adjustments and that kind of stuff, that you probably did something wrong because you should have been focused on that like leading up, weeks leading up to it. It's fine if you're making some small tweaks or like your posing coach has you like, okay, let's maybe like make this small last minute tweak, whatever. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is like, I really need to like revamp my posing routine or like we really need to change like entirely change this pose or like what is something dramatic, right? That stuff should have been done throughout the entire contest prep. So I think that that's a big talking point too. Within a peak week, one way to reduce a lot of stress is to just be prepared. So like everything that you did leading up to the peak week, if you want to be less stressed during peak week, then execute your prep better. That way you don't have to stress about things last minute. But there are a lot of things that we need to have paired, like, your MPC card or, IFPB, making sure that all that's figured out registration wise and then registering for the show, making sure TAN's booked, all that kind of stuff. Within the peak week, the final moments, like backstage, let's talk about like backstage. What are some like do's and don'ts for you or like things that you see people doing, maybe like without necessarily calling anybody out, right? But some mistakes that you may see. I'm a big proponent of like there is no right or wrong. There's only context and perspective, right? So like you never know what the context is. It's just like when you're in the gym, you see somebody doing exercise, but within like a contest prep and backstage, there's probably stuff that people are blatantly doing. So what are some things you see? What are some things you focus on yourself backstage leading up to, getting on stage?
You'll see a lot of different things going on, and that's where you can't like let that phase you or affect you of like, oh, should I be doing that? Should I be doing that? Like, should I look like that? You definitely have to like tune all that out and just listen to your coach and your one plan. Because I know I'm thinking back to like my first show, my first prep with my first coach, who my that coach did not come to that show. So I was like full on by myself winging it. I had multiple like in my ear like about posing, and it's just like very overwhelming. So you do have to find your rhythm and kind of know your personality, where I'm a little bit more of an introvert and I can be a little bit of an extrovert. So like me personally, I know that like day of like when I'm going backstage that for the most part, I need to just like be with myself, like put music on, kick my feet up, and like follow the plan to a certain point. And then, like, maybe around the time that I'm supposed to like glaze or pump up, that's when I can be a little bit more social with some of the athletes. If you're a very extroverted person, maybe you just want to talk the whole time and that's fine. But for me, I know like I do need to be more like relaxed and calm because I get very like anxious, I guess, more naturally. You'll see people that will just be like pounding down the Sour Patch Kids, or like they're pumping up and they're with me in like class F and we're on like not even figure yet, you know? So pumping up too soon, like glazing too soon, eating like random things that you have not been eating all of prep, and now you're deciding on the day of your show to introduce them to your body. And you, I mean, maybe if you've done a mock prep, you might know how you respond, but even then, it's a little bit like questionable if that's gonna, you know, if you're gonna elicit the same response. I think those are like the main things I see. And then what we touched on with like preparation, if like you're still in your hotel room and you're like, oh, I have time. Like, I mean, sometimes you do, but sometimes you might have just missed your class.
So, with that being said, like on show day, you don't really know when you're going to be on stage. So, that's a really tough pill to swallow because it's like you want to be able to predict everything, and everything that you've done kind of leading up to that point is creating a level of predictability, but like in terms of what time you're like actually going to be on stage is pretty difficult to predict. Fortunately, you're a pro now, but if you're an amateur, it's a lot more ambiguous, so you're kind of lost a little bit in terms of knowing exactly what time you're going to be on stage. So you have to ride a balance because there's either way more time than you think you're going to need, or there's way less time than you think you're going to need. So like it's kind of finding the midline there, I suppose. If you're like lower in the sequencing, you can usually expect that they're going to like slow down pace a little bit at some point, right? Most shows don't take this as instruction for your next show because God knows what will happen there. But usually like they'll start off like, okay, we need to move through this because we have a lot of competitors to get through. They'll start off with a good pace, but obviously the judges are human, right? So at some point they're going to start to bog down a little bit, right? Because they've just been sitting there staring at half naked physiques for the past like 3 hours, right? So they're going to start to bog down a little bit at some point, most likely. So if you're towards the end of like the sequencing, you can expect things to probably slow down a little bit. So usually it's bikini that gets like the shit end of the stick. Like they're usually like last. And sometimes we'll be there until like midnight or even 1 a.m. for bikini judging at an amateur level show, depending on how many competitors are there. But that's a good example of how things kind of like start to bog down. And then they're like, okay, we need to take an intermission because the judges are like, we've been doing this for 7 hours. I'm on like 20 cups of coffee. Like I need a moment to just breathe. So usually they'll take like an intermission before like wellness or figure, depending on the sequencing, and then bikini and fit model and all that kind of stuff too. So it's tough though trying to figure it out. So usually like if you're a bodybuilder, you're gonna go first, and they're gonna like toss you on stage like go go go, right? That's gonna start to slow down a little bit. So I've had a lot of competitors that are bodybuilders. Obviously, we got to get to the venue as soon as like the show time starts. Like you're pretty much gonna be tossed up on stage. So that's like completely different, right? We got to focus on that. So it depends on the division. Again, the sequencing. If it's a bikini competitor, I'm like, oh, you got time. Go get your hair done, get your makeup done, like get your nails, whatever you need to do. We're chilling, and it's like noon, and they're just getting their hair done, like da da da, and like they're just like running through divisions on stage, and they get to just kind of hang out in the morning. It can be, there's like give and take there because you're gonna have to like wait around until like the last second, and then you're like the last division to go on stage, right? So, but you touched on a good one too, like not pumping up too early. That's a big one, and that's like tough because you're backstage, especially if you're like a first time competitor and you're like really anxious and you're like, I want to get on stage. I need to move, right? Because anxiety is usually like the result of not being able to execute something that you want to execute, or just not executing something that you want to execute. When like the stage, you're about to get on stage, but you can't do it yet. So you're going to have anxiety. It's almost like inherent, right? And you want to do something to like expend all that energy that you have built up. A lot of people will gravitate towards starting to pump up. They're like, oh, I'll just start pumping up. Or that anxiety is driving you to like think that you're going to be on stage sooner than you actually are. So it could be quite a while there. Like you said, the division before you is like still in staging, and you're like already pumping up. It's probably a poor strategy. I usually recommend my athletes not to start pumping up until they like get in staging, or in line. Their number has been called to get into staging, and they're kind of like in those lines that are going to move down the row, right? That's when you can start pumping up. And ideally, we're already in a spot where we're like popping at the seams, like in terms of peaking, right? Like if you're having to do things that are really dramatic in terms of carbohydrate intake and pumping up backstage, something probably went wrong. And that's not to say that that doesn't happen. Like I've had athletes where we're having to do a little bit of like pushing food a little bit harder backstage. Like we did that with you at nationals, for example. You know, it can happen even with like the best coach and the best process and everything. Everybody's different, but the more you're having to do that stuff, the more something might have gone wrong. So I think we had to do that at nationals because it was like taking so long. It took way longer to get on stage than we had expected. So we had to give you more food. But anyways, like the more you're having to like slam a whole bag of Sour Patch Kids or like whole box of Pop Tarts, or like you're starting to pump up like in like 2 hours before you're even supposed to be on stage or going to end up on stage, the more something probably went wrong, or you're just screwing yourself and probably like really messing up your look. So the backstage is not the place for a dramatic anything. You should be resting, should be pretty much peaked. You should be, all you need to do is just get a little bit of a pump, get out on stage, and you're good to go. So the more that that plays out in that way, you like were successful in terms of the entire peak week. So usually, you know that your peak week was pretty successful if like last minute you're just chilling backstage and like you just get a little pump before you go up on stage, your physique starts to like develop more as you pose. As soon as you walk out on stage, people are like, oh shit, this guy's conditioned, or this lady's conditioned, whatever it is. That usually tells you that you did a good job, right? So I know that when you came out for every single show that we've done together, you came out on stage and I was like, wow, like we nailed it, you know, like pretty much every single time. It was just like, damn, she's a showstopper. Like conditioning's there, tan's there, everything's perfect. And it's just like letting the cards fall however they do, right? In terms of placing. And fortunately, we've pretty much won everything except for nationals. So with you being backstage, like pretty much every single time, would you say that, you know, nothing dramatic had to really happen outside of like, you know, shifting things a little bit more during nationals and stuff? Like we pretty much had to do pretty minimal stuff backstage for every show, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, you were pretty much set up. What are some things that people should be like focused on when it comes to like tanning? Because that's one thing that people can really mess up that can throw off the final look. I would say like tanning and posing are two things that are within your control, or somewhat within your control. Obviously, somebody else is tanning you, but you know, those are two things that can really screw you up. Like if your tan sucks and your posing sucks, it doesn't matter how great of shape you're in, it's probably going to like have a negative impact, at least with how the judges are looking at you, even if you end up getting first, right?
Uh-huh.
So what are some things you focus on when it comes to tanning? Some tips and tricks, perhaps?
Yeah. So for posing, that's definitely what I know we mentioned this. That's way before peak week that you're working on that. That should be like solidified by peak week. But then peak week for tanning, like big thing being like skin preparation. Check what you are putting on your body. Like if it's something that's gonna have like a moisturizing effect on it, like you don't want that. You do want like dry skin. You want to make sure that you have like shaved your whole body. You know, I'm blonde, but I have like the blonde hairs on my arms, and so I'll go ahead and do my arms as well, making sure because the tan is gonna like show that, and the less hair that you have, the better look that you're gonna have on stage. So I know you mentioned pro tan. That's typically who I've gotten to do. I think there's been one show that had a different, like the promoter through the promoter's website, they had a different company, but for the most part, it's been Protein. So I'll use their like get buffed, like scrub a couple days leading up until like the day before show, making sure that when you again, this is all like planning. So making sure that when you book your tan, it correlates with like when you're going to get to your venue, that you're not like stressed out to get there. Depending on how darker skin is. If you're more fair skin like me, you may need up to 3 coats of tan. You might have to do like a base coat yourself, and then doing 1 coat the night before, making sure you know that you are um, not going to be doing anything after you get that initial coat of tan, so you don't mess it up. Sleep naked if you have to. If you're like staying with someone in the hotel room, like try to get 2 different beds. If you have like family or a significant other that's staying with you. Yeah, and then the morning of, obviously, kind of same thing. You're not wanting to be like doing anything that's going to be exerting a lot of sweat. If you can stay in a hotel that's the same place as the venue, That's the most ideal because if you're having to go from one hotel to the place, which sometimes you have to, but if the weather isn't ideal outside, whether it's like hot or like raining and stuff like that, that could potentially mess up your tan. So just making sure that you're like accounting for all those factors. It's a lot. Again, like just try to plan in advance and then be super nice to the people that are tanning you as well. I try to like bring them little gifts because they're working their tail off the night before or the day before on all the competitors. They're working the morning of like I know they've been working like a lot of hours. They're tired too, but they always have great attitudes. So just making sure that you're like chatting with them and they're also having and they're used to it, but like they're having to tan all these naked people. They're great at like making conversation, making you feel comfortable. Even if it's like your first time, they'll talk you through like every little like position. I think that was maybe my first time getting a spray tan was at my first show too. So that was like, what is going on? Like all these naked people around you. So just like again, like soak in all the experiences. You're spending a lot of money on a tan and you don't want to mess it up. I know even at like North Americans this past year, there was like with my tan, there was a splotch on one spot. One of the females noticed it, I think like after the after prejudging and was like, oh, let me fix that. So just make sure that they like take a double look at you as well.
Yeah, for sure. It can be helpful to have your coach backstage too to like pinpoint little imperfections and stuff. Cause like you said, the tanning ladies have probably been grinding for like solid couple of days leading up to being backstage and like touching people up and stuff. And they're touching up a lot of people. So having somebody else to have a second set of eyes for you is important. Now, I did want to touch on that too, because I think that there's a little bit of misconception and kind of like skewed perspective in terms of expectations when it comes to having your coach backstage. So when it comes to having your coach backstage, first and foremost, it isn't necessary. So, many athletes, very successful athletes, have had very successful experiences without having their coach backstage. Now, that's not to say that communication is just as important and like the coach has to put in a lot of effort to make sure that that is dialed in, making sure that photos are being taken, making sure that communication is tight. It's also the athlete's responsibility to make sure that you're communicating tightly with your coach. If they're not there at the show, making sure that you're doing all the things that you need to do, being very communicative, not ghosting them on show day, all that kind of stuff. And so it's very doable and it's possible, and it's not necessary for your coach to be there. It can be an added benefit. Everybody's a little bit different in this regard. I personally enjoy being at shows if I can be there for my athlete. I enjoy show day for like just being there and supporting and like the emotions and the passion because I love the sport, right? But again, it's not necessary. So I've seen kind of as like people will be like, "Oh, my coach wasn't even at my show." Like that's not inherently a bad thing, right? So let's reframe that. Now, it's different if your coach wasn't at your show and your entire peak week protocol was like terrible and they ghosted you 48 hours before the show. That's a different discussion, right? But if your coach is there, like heavy on communication, doing like has you well prepared, everything dialed in, and they're not at the show, you can't expect a coach to always be available to be at the show, especially if it's not local. And then the other thing that I've seen talking shit about is coaches not traveling to the show when and or asking their athletes to financially cover, travel expenses, that kind of stuff. That's crazy to me. You expect a coach to pay out of pocket to travel to wherever it is, whatever the rates are in terms of flights, the hotel, the Airbnb, everything, taking time off of their work schedule, like all of that for you, then there's probably some level of entitlement there. Now, that's not to say that if a coach is available, you have a high caliber show that's like out of town, right? And that the coach wants to be there. But in terms of coach asking for some sort of financial coverage for that is very, very rational, makes perfect sense, and should probably be a practice that they have in place. So I just want to put that out there because I've seen people talking shit about that before, and I'm like dumbfounded by that. So it's just like a level of entitlement that kind of leaves me a little bit flabbergasted. But obviously, like, most coaches that are passionate about what they do are going to want to be at the show, but having like financial coverage for that is important. A coach that's great at what they do can execute at an extremely high level without having to be there. It's just plain and simple. So just setting expectations for athletes there in that regard. Now, what have you noticed like differences in terms of having your coach there? Having obviously, I've been at pretty much every show we've done. What is kind of the differences in experience for you personally in terms of having a coach there and having not having a coach there? And is there a significant difference for you? Obviously, it's different coaches. any differences?
Yeah, so that was for my first show again, so, like, again, I didn't know what to expect, I didn't know that a coach was supposed to come to your show or anything like that. There was, from what I can recall, this was a long time ago, like, pretty decent communication, like, just instruction on, like, "Okay, like, let me know when your class is lining up, let me know, like, how you're feeling." So, it was, I'd say, like, fair. I know I've heard a lot of athletes, like, with much worse experience of kind of what you mentioned, like ghosting on like the peak week. So with not having anything to compare it to, that was good. I think again with like the kind of person that I am, like type A preparation, like I was prepared with everything that I needed to, like my own bands, my own blanket and like set up in the little corner and stuff like that. That was fine. Basically, I think almost every show since then I've had a coach at. And the main thing, there is a difference because it's more just of like knowing someone's there, I guess, and like they can take a look at you and give that like reassurance of like, all right, you look good, you know? But other than that, you're getting the same whether they're there or not, as long as they're communicating with you, you're getting the same feedback of like, okay, at this time, eat 3 rice cakes or whatever, you know? So, yes, there's a difference, but it's not the end of the world if they're not there. You can do it without a coach there for sure. I would say, I think, like, for me, I do really enjoy you being there because I do like that assurance of like you being able to see me in person. But again, it's not the end of the world either for North Americans. You were close by, but you weren't backstage. And so
Mhm.
it worked out just fine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I forgot that aspect of North Americans as well. So, and the higher the level you get to, like pro shows that I've been to, like nationals, North Americans, that kind of stuff, I feel like the less value there is to have a coach like backstage, like having a coach in the same proximity, like they're like, taking photos of you, doing in person check ins, like at the hotel, like that kind of, that's where it becomes more valuable. But I find like in terms of being backstage, like you're an athlete, like you know what's going on. You probably don't want a coach breathing down your neck at that point. You just want to focus. So I feel like being backstage is like less of a value. I think being backstage is more of a value to like somebody that's a newer competitor maybe and just doesn't know what's going on. And having a coach there for like just emotional support a little bit, just having somebody like, hey, it's all good, just wait, like chill, don't do what everybody else is doing right now. Cause that's essentially what I do if I'm like a first time competitor and I'm backstage for their show. It's like, just chill, relax, don't worry about what's going on over there. They're like, "Oh, okay." And it helps with like stress management, right? But outside of that, like, being backstage isn't the largest value now. Like you said, like a coach seeing you in person, that kind of stuff can be helpful. I do want to touch on how it can be a little bit of a detriment too. So like if a coach is looking at you in person like a bunch of times, like at a hotel and making calls on the spot, that's sometimes a poor strategy depending on the coach, right? And how level headed they are. Even the most level headed, like emotionally controlled coaches can have start to get skewed perspectives when they're looking at the same physique over and over and over again within hours. And so, one thing I practice, and this can be like maybe a learning lesson for some other coaches here that may be listening, is making sure that you're detaching like emotionally from the process of looking at an athlete continuously over like really short spans of time, like at a national level show or pro level show, whatever it may be. You're going and maybe looking at an athlete, checking in with them in their hotel room like every 2, 3 hours, whatever. Don't make calls on the spot. Like take photos, take a look at them in person because there's a lot of energy going on. There's a lot of passion, there's excitement, there's anxiety, there's a lot of things that are piling up. You're stressed too. You probably have a bit of an adrenaline rush. You may not be taking care of yourself as well as you typically do. I know when I travel to shows, like I'm like much more focused on my athletes and like if I get one meal that day or like a few cups of coffee, then I'm good, whatever it is, right? But I'm much more focused on just like whatever my athletes need. So take pictures, don't make any calls, go back to your hotel room by yourself or your Airbnb or wherever you are, go to a quiet room, focus, look at the photos, compare the photos, look at the full programming, make sure you're like being methodical about the decisions and then adjust instead of just like doing things on the fly. Sometimes that coach's instinct works well, sometimes it doesn't, but I find that at least like maybe having something in mind, like your initial instinct, and then going and sitting and thinking about it for a moment and letting emotions die down can be really helpful in terms of calls that you make. And I know Danielle, you've seen me do that many times. I'm like, I'm not making it. You're like, what do I eat next? I'm like, I'll tell you in like 10 minutes. I have to go back to my hotel room. And usually that's what I'll do. So That's really helpful. Making calls on the fly. I've done that in the past too at a very high level and been successful with it. Sometimes coach's instinct that works well. Sometimes it can be a bit of a risk. So, focusing on those things. Like I said, having a coach at your show is more valuable in terms of like at that higher level, just being there through the process leading up to you being on stage, backstage, it's less of a thing. Athletes keep that in mind. Like, if you're a first time competitor and really want your coach backstage for emotional support, that's one thing, but take into consideration that it's just not necessary if it's not something like an expense that you want to add on top of everything that you're already doing. And you can't expect your coach to just pay out of pocket for that kind of stuff. For example, just to put it in perspective, let's say an athlete's paying whatever leading up to like a show where I have to travel to it, right? It's like 3 months of like pay may not even cover like the travel expenses, right? If you're expecting that from a coach, you're expecting them to essentially work for free. I can't agree with that. Anything else that you can think of that's valuable about having your coach in the same proximity or backstage with you at a show? And, what are some things that you've seen as a coach now too? Because you've put athletes on stage. What are some things that you've helped your athletes with backstage?
Yeah, a big thing is just the being able to like regulate emotions, kind of like you said, just being able to calm them down if they are someone that's like, what do I need to do next? What do I need to do? So I think that's a big thing. Newer competitors, maybe if they're unsure of like how just like the backstage process goes, like where are they supposed to, like be pumping up? Where are they supposed to be getting glazed? Where are they, how often are they supposed to be posing and stuff like that? So getting more information to them backstage if they have like wardrobe malfunctions or anything like that, that they can like relay that to you pretty fast, I guess. But you also want to be able to enjoy like your time, and experience that like without your coach too. Like I said, I like to be able to like just kick my feet up and put headphones in and like zone out. And then I also like to be able to just go communicate with the other athletes too. So you don't want your coach like hovering over you the whole time either. Yeah, I think you mentioned you were saying for having a coach backstage, right?
Just like in the same proximity, essentially.
Yeah.
Like how I touched on, in-person check-ins in the hotel, that kind of stuff too, like leading up to it, especially at a higher level.
Yes, and that was something I hadn't experienced before either, was, like, a coach being able to see me in person the night before, so that was really helpful to be able to, like, show, like, my physique where we were at, like, if we needed to make any adjustments, and then what you mentioned, being able to, like, take time apart so you can, like, as a coach, come up. I really like that, and I respect that, being able to, like, with a clear head, make the call, because that was something I had also experienced was with a different coach backstage was like, "You look a little flat. Do you have any potato chips?" Why would I have brought potato chips, you know? I was just like, and that freaked me out. I was like, "No, was I supposed to? Where do I go get them?" Like, my anxiety starts going up from there.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, just being able to, like, have that clear head, here's the plan, like, it's stuff that you've already brought, like, definitely helps, like, keep a more calm environment.
Yeah, it blows my mind that that's like the practice for stuff like potato chips. I mean, it makes sense, I guess. Potatoes have potassium and sodium and like carbs, right? But I don't know. The more we can just measure stuff and have control over it, the better, especially when it comes to fluid, electrolytes, carbohydrates, up to stepping on stage. And there should be a pretty significant level of predictability leading into a peak week as well. That's one of the primary things that you're going to focus on is going to be creating a level of predictability, like how does the body respond to what we're going to do. And that's not to say that you should have like usually I have Danielle, you can speak on this too, but usually I have like a tentative plan like leading up to your show, right? Like we've already kind of figured out how your body's going to respond and it's going to look different every contest prep too. It's not going to be like we're going to repeat what we did this last contest prep. Your bio like kind of processes and what's happening physiologically is going to change every single prep and there can be some level of predictability from what we've done in the past, right? But each prep's going to look a little bit different in terms of how it's played out, what we have to do, where your metabolic set points are, all that kind of stuff. But ideally, heading into a peak week, you have some level of predictability. We know how your body's going to respond to like this amount of food. etc. There may be things that we learned from the past that we're going to kind of incorporate in. But I kind of set up like a tentative plan, but that's not to say that it's not going to change, right? I always tell you that when we start to check in more frequently through a peak week, I'm like, this is all subject to change. We have something kind of set in stone. And the part of the reason I do that is so that the athlete has more peace of mind. It's like, okay, I know what's coming up, right? I at least have a general idea of what's coming up. Because if you're just like on the fly the entire time with an athlete, that's going to add to their level of stress. Because we're always like, as coaches, we're like, the athlete needs to like reduce your stress, reduce your stress. But what can we be doing as coaches to reduce their stress too, right? So that's one thing I do. Give them a tentative plan and then focus on, like, hey, this is all subject to change. Set realistic expectations with them, making sure that their heads wrapped around it. If you're not careful with how you set expectations too, they're going to pack all those meals, right? And then they may have to adjust those meals on the fly. That can become difficult and even more stressful. So it's all subject to change, and then adjust as you go. And then as you get closer to the show, more and more fine tuning. Now, there has actually been experiences where I set up a tentative plan and I literally don't have to make a single adjustment through the entire peaking process, and they peak like just fantastic peak. Like I'm just like, wow, that was I'm gonna give myself a pat on the back for that, right? Sometimes that happens, but most times we're gonna make some adjustments leading up to it, whether it's with like sodium amounts, water. I do not recommend significantly playing around with sodium and water unless you know what you're doing and you're doing really frequent check-ins with people. I hear a lot of like another polarizing kind of thing where it's like water and sodium should be left alone, and then it's like, oh, you should just do this crazy like same thing for everybody with this water and sodium. It's different for everybody, and if you know what you're doing, you should have that kind of set up to modulate it, like in terms of electrolytes and fluid, and then carbohydrates in tandem with that in terms of loading up, and fats sometimes as well, and shifting those things based on the athlete. Sometimes it will change, sometimes it won't change. It depends on the person and how they look and how you're adjusting those things leading up to show day. So I've had athletes where they're drinking very little water, higher sodium, let's say leading up to stepping on stage. I've had some athletes where it's like we literally don't touch it the entire time. We may just reduce water on show day so that they're not like bloated full of water walking on stage. It's different from person to person. There's no one size fits all. And if you know what you're doing with sodium and water, you should be able to adjust that and know what I'm talking about here. So Danielle, do you have any final words, and where can the people find you? Danielle is a fantastic coach. She's been killing it and growing her roster, and her athletes are very satisfied and happy to be working with her.
Yeah. I think one thing to like also, I guess, finish touching on with peak week is also make sure that you have a post show plan.
Yes.
Just making sure that you have a plan for post show during your peak week, even though it's like the week prior. But just like you had mentioned, like you have kind of that plan going into show week, but also post show because that's so important. But I appreciate you highlighting my coaching as well, and can be found at, I guess, on Instagram at Danielle_626.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on. And next time, maybe we'll talk about like post show process, reverse dieting, that kind of stuff. It's a good inspiration point. So, thank you again for coming on. Thank you for joining us. Your journey towards excellence does not end here. We're here to help guide you every step of the way. For more insights and to become a part of our community, follow and subscribe. Your feedback illuminates our path. Be sure to share your thoughts and stay tuned for more episodes.